So yeah, good morning, everybody. Welcome to part 3 in our data strategy series. As some of you will know, we've been doing a sort of series of these webinars based around the pillars of our data strategy. So today we're focusing on data platforms and technology that fits. I'm going to do a very quick intro of Transparity, just for those of you that maybe aren't familiar with us, just to give you a bit of an overview of who we are and what we're about. And then we'll get into the core content of the actual webinar itself. So we talk about being built around transformation, partnership, and clarity, and sort of the cornerstone of Transparity as an organization, and our success is the people that work here. So for us, attracting the right talent with the right skills and capabilities to deliver the solutions we put in for our customers is really important. And that's obviously what drives compelling outcomes for customers and delivering technical solutions that add value. We've got a summary slide here that outlines a lot of the badges and the ways in which we measure ourselves as an organization, and getting third party and external validation for what you do is really important for us. So whether we're looking at NPS feedback from employees and from our customers, whether we're looking at reviews on Glassdoor, some of the tech affiliations that we have out in the wider marketplace, it's good to measure ourselves against those benchmarks. From a Microsoft perspective, we're a pure play Microsoft partner, and we deliver cloud solutions first and foremost. It's the core of what we do, and obviously having the right credentials in that space is really important to us. And you can see here we carry all of the Microsoft partner solution designations, and the sort of the change from gold partnership to solution designations that occurred sort of 12 months or so ago from Microsoft point of view has given a much more rigid and robust benchmark for measuring capabilities that organizations have. And you can see that's built off the back of all of the advanced specializations that underpin those designations and all of the certifications that you'd expect a Microsoft partner to carry. So once again, if you want some more detail around some of this, we can obviously do a follow-up session around it. I won't dwell too much on this. I'm going to go and focus on the actual core of this session. So if we have a quick look at the agenda, we're on part 3 of this series. So data platforms and technology that fits. We're going to have a little look at Synapse and Fabric and some of the other content that we bump into out there, and talk a bit about design patterns and reference architecture, and then get into how we go about migrating data platforms and perhaps making sure we scale costs and develop those platforms in the right way. So let me step into the start of this session. So this slide we've pulled up at the start of every one of these series webinars, where we're focusing on each of these pillars from each webinar that we run. So obviously we're in the platform space today. And the technology and the platform decisions you make around your data strategy are going to be critical. We talk a lot about modern data platform and choosing the right technology. And that isn't necessarily as simple as just choosing Microsoft and choosing Fabric, for example. There are a lot of facets to making sure the technology fits with your business. So that's what we're going to explore today, and just try and take a slightly higher level view above maybe the granular detail of what the platforms can do, and talk about it from why you should choose a certain platform and some of the considerations that you should make around that. So Synapse and Fabric. When you have a look around online, you'll find there's a whole host of blog posts and content and articles published by organizations like ourselves or by Microsoft or people in the data space comparing Synapse and Fabric and different platforms and tooling. And I don't want to get into the sort of the finer detail of that, but I think it's worth understanding at a high level where you're coming from when you're choosing one of these solution approaches versus another. So Synapse is a PaaS-based architecture. So it's a comprehensive analytics service. And it was always considered as an evolution on from moving into Azure SQL data warehouse capabilities in the cloud, and would be your modern cloud approach from perhaps on-prem SQL servers or traditional workload. But as a PaaS architecture, it's a series of services that you would make use of to build your platform and your solution. Now, Fabric is a SaaS-based architecture, so it is a level above some of the complexities of managing and looking after what Synapse might offer for you. So, you know, heralded as an end-to-end analytics and data platform within a user-friendly UI. And if you look back at some of the early Synapse developments, you know, it was being held up as a platform with some of those same buzzwords around it. But Fabric is a step on from that, given the experiences that sit within that space. And then everything else in our world really is what we might consider legacy platforms or legacy solutions. And that could be on-prem SQL workload, those traditional data warehousing workloads that you'll find out there. There's a lot of organizations running infrastructure to service platforms where they have your virtual machines, hosting data platforms, and perhaps either proprietary software or software and solutions that they've bought from other vendors that are running on those virtual machines. And we also see some PaaS point solutions where people have perhaps put in some cloud architecture to support a particular use case or a particular workload. So maybe you're just consuming an IoT device and you've got a couple of components managing some workload for you there. And that may not have been considered as a wider data platform. And we look at sort of the key features of these platforms. You know, Synapse has been positioned as a single workspace for doing all of your data integration and your big data analytics workload and your data warehousing workload. And there's a developer environment that provides a centralized interface. It's geared towards data engineers and data scientists. We'd hold it up today as a more technical interface, perhaps, rather than one that's a bit more accessible to the business analyst or someone that's perhaps a bit more data savvy in your organization. But the platform was designed to bring together traditional SQL data warehousing technology and perhaps that Spark technology, big data analytics, that Databricks mindset in terms of what the platform can do. And you look at what Fabric is described as, an integrated platform with all your data analytical capabilities in one place. It's described in a very similar way to Synapse, but the difference with Fabric is it is a step on from that PaaS architecture. So we're no longer cherry picking the components. And we'll take a look at this in a moment, the reference architecture for these two different platforms, and just see how different it does look when you're discussing what you're going to do with it. And Fabric is built around a set of experiences. So those key pillars, whether it's integrating data, doing some visualization work, your machine learning workload. So you can cherry pick from those experiences and make use of them. A key difference with Fabric is this one lake concept where you have a unified location for all of your data. So whether it's structured, unstructured, data warehousing workload, transitory data flowing through for integration purposes, the whole idea is that one lake architecture would support that. So it removes some of that management of storage capability away from you and gives you some elastic scale around that platform. And when we talk about everything else, we often refer to a SQL platform or a legacy solution with the term legacy or old or being replaced. And quite often these platforms are still very effective. We have a lot of clients ourselves that are running SQL-based workload on virtualized infrastructure or on-prem servers on tin, and they're effective systems that work. And it's worth remembering that just because there are new and different approaches with cloud architecture, that what's out there deployed in live today doesn't necessarily not work or just doesn't necessarily have to be replaced. And quite often you'll find there are specialist workloads or perhaps proprietary analytical tools being used out there for certain use cases where those systems are really effective. So the reasons for migrating, they might not be an issue or a problem with the solution itself, but perhaps the architecture that it's sitting on. And we'll explore a little bit of that as well. So when we look at design patterns and reference architectures next, where do you start when you're thinking about what is the technology platform I should be considering from a data perspective? And it can get quite confusing when you start digging around all of the various content that's available out there online. And we often say, look, understand the distinction between the design pattern and reference architecture. These things are talked about often as if they're the same thing, and fundamentally there are key differences. A design pattern would focus on perhaps a single problem and would solve part of a solution for you, whereas a reference architecture would usually consider your wider data platform as a whole. and making sure that you don't just cherry pick 3 or 4 design patterns and try and put them together and have a challenge with your wider solution. You maybe end up with 4-point solutions that don't work particularly well together. So just understand that distinction when you're considering that. And what is best practice, and what is best practice for you is the thing that we always start with when we're having these conversations with customers about putting in new data platforms. And where you're beginning from will also be a key part of that. So if you're currently on a digital transformation journey, you've got no content in the cloud at all at the moment, you're probably going to start right at the early stages. You'll consider things like Microsoft's Cloud Adoption Framework, which will be focused on getting a well-governed, secure architecture in place to start with. You're getting those landing zones built. And that's the sort of area where, as a data and AI practice, we would lean on our Azure team and our Azure practice capability to get some of that in place first of all. And then you start looking at well-architectured frameworks within that cloud architecture. And the approach that you would take, once again, would be depending on the use cases and examples that you've got. And we see CAF and WAF as complementary frameworks that help you achieve a successful cloud migration. But the WAF approach will help you get to that operational system setup and the cloud solution footprint for your data platform that sits in that wider architecture piece. Looking beyond short-term use cases and finding a balance between point solutions and a consistent approach is really critical. We've seen it on a number of occasions where there might be a particular requirement that an organization has, and it builds an end-to-end data platform to satisfy a particular requirement. Maybe they're consuming data from an API, or they're providing a service to a third party, or they're pulling in some data from one of their cloud solutions. And you get to a point where you've got that built and sitting there with an organization, then the requirement 2 comes along, you haven't thought about that, and suddenly you've got to start refactoring what you've put in place, or maybe the efficiencies that you might get from having designed it in a different way, you're not getting that benefit from it. So even if you're not going to do everything up front, and we rarely do try and deliver big monolithic solutions, it is worth considering where does this platform need to get you to slightly longer term, and are there some decisions you should make now? And a lot of organizations don't necessarily consider where they are today, and we've got customers that have got established on-prem data warehousing workloads which are adding real value to the business, and there might be business functions and users in an organization that are dependent on the workload that legacy architecture is providing for them today. So considering the impact on those users is critically important, making sure that when we migrate architecture, we don't impact them. But there may also be skills and knowledge and functionality sitting in that platform that will inform what you're doing with your new platform. And sometimes that will simplify and make it easier to design and implement that new solution. It will offer some consistency to an organization. But on the flip side of it, where you've got things that aren't working very well for the business today, you've got an opportunity to address those. But it's very easy to put a legacy solution on the shelf and forget about it, and start with a clean state on a new platform, and maybe forget some of the lessons that you've learned, or worst case scenario, repeat some of the mistakes that you've made before. It's worth visiting the Azure Architecture Center online. There's a whole intro to CAF and WAF frameworks, and it starts to break out into all the different design patterns that are available out there. We're going to have a look now at a couple of the sort of entry points for us from a data platform perspective, just focusing down a little bit from that wider cloud migration requirement. So pre-Fabric, we'd been talking about a Synapse-based architecture as a modern data platform. And the sort of bullet points on the left-hand side are the key things you're trying to establish when you put your data platform in place. A modern architecture, I want security and scalability. I want to be able to manage my data and govern it in an effective way, integrate all my solutions in a harmonious way. And there'd be the same sort of key points you'd have been looking at on a traditional platform or on a Fabric platform. And you can see from a Synapse perspective, it is a collection of services. We have this central piece here which talks about the Synapse Analytics specific service, but it is augmented by all sorts of other capability around that wider cloud platform. And this is why an Azure Synapse implementation is more of a technical implementation perhaps than what a Fabric one would be, because the need to understand how different components and services fit together, and perhaps the data engineering requirements and skills are a bit more in depth when you're building a Synapse platform. We often talk about this type of architecture with a much simpler perspective and break it down into the look. I'm going to get some data in its data factory. I'm going to store it in some storage, typically a Gen 2 storage architecture of some sort, and I'm going to process and transform some of that data. And we'll talk a little bit about, do we use Synapse? Do we use Databricks? There's lots of decisions and choices you can make when you get into the detail of these platforms, and there's not necessarily a right answer for everybody in that. So we look at comparing Synapse Analytics with Databricks. You'll find that machine learning and real-time workloads, Databricks tends to be favored. You'll find when you look at analyzing data using SQL syntax or data warehousing techniques, that Synapse would be preferred. And if you're just querying, discovering data, then you've got a choice of tools that you can make use of. So once again, understanding your use cases is really important when you're considering this type of architecture. If you're buried in a Synapse implementation today and you're looking at Fabric and worrying about it, I wouldn't. We'll touch on Fabric in a moment. There's a roadmap and a path to get from Synapse to Fabric. It's not a simple point and click upgrade at this point in time, but there are continuous improvements to Fabric, and there are toolkits coming on stream to help us with that migration process. But there's no need to sort of panic and throw your hands up about investment you put into a Synapse platform. There's a lot of overlap between the baseline capability and the underlying technology that sits beneath these platforms. So if we flick over to look at a view of a reference architecture for Fabric, there's a sort of few common diagrams flying around that you'll recognize if you've done a bit of reading around the Fabric platform. But you can see immediately it's presented as a much simpler proposition. It's a software platform that wraps these different experiences together. So you're going into a consistent UI in the same place and managing your data factory pipelines and your notebooks for engineering activity, creating machine learning workload, of course, managing that wider Power BI footprint that sits within there. And the key concept of one lake sitting beneath it is the storage location where you put data, but you would still be designing perhaps medallion architectures and building different types of data structures within that lake to support the different types of workload that you might have. You'll see as well, there's some new pillars that start to appear in Fabric, and with it being a SaaS-based platform, you shouldn't underestimate both the pros and cons of preview features and the platform being in a constant state of improvement. And for those of you that have used something like Power BI for a number of years now, or buried in the 365 ecosystem, you'll know you get those continuous improvements and those continuous changes to platform. I think being on top of those changes and understanding what's coming through the platform is really important. So you're not exposing preview functionality to business users that become dependent on it. You can manage the release and the use of those capabilities over time. But also, you'd have known from a Power BI point of view that this type of cadence and development around a platform means that you do see quick and fast progressive development and new features coming on stream with Fabric. And just from its inception, or it's moving out of preview back in the last year around November time to today, we had quite a few gaps and challenges around the platform in some of those early adoption solutions that we put in. But we're now starting to see continuous integration and continuous deployment for pipeline features coming through preview. The way you organize content in Fabric, it's not a fantastic experience at the moment. So things like workspace folders and the ability to better organize content, you've got features of that coming on stream. And the basics of managing environments, you're deploying notebooks and pipelines for dev, UAT, and production environments. There were some challenges with some manual workarounds to handle that effectively. But again, there are features coming through now that are making Fabric as a platform much more robust. So it's not a platform in preview. I think we have something like 25 active projects implementing Fabric at this point in time. So we do have substantial adoption of the technology platform. But every one of those implementations we've considered features capability that may be missing or may drive a different decision about some of the features you'd augment Fabric with. We've talked a bit before in some of the other sessions about our frameworks and metadata. So we deliver a framework that augments the flow of data into our data platforms, and our framework works with a SQL database. It works with open source Python-based architectures. It works with Synapse and Fabric, and this is how we've adopted a sensible way of managing the flow of data into a data platform in a consistent way, and it also offers us the ability to provide an upgrade path for our customers that might be running a Synapse-based architecture and want to start to transfer into Fabric. We have a migration path for our framework, and the metadata structure is very similar. So therefore, all we're really doing is switching where data is being landed as we move a platform across. And whether you use our framework or not, when you're considering from a data strategy point of view your wider technology platform decision-making process, you should be thinking about where you are today and where you want to get to, and maybe not choosing technology or not choosing a design approach that might be a barrier to where you might where you can't even speak, where you might want to take your platform to at a later stage. There's a whole host of things to consider when migrating data platforms. So we've got 30 minutes, so I've basically chucked a few key bullet points that I'm going to talk around to get started with. Look, the right time and the right way is really important. We often find we get engaged in data programs where an organization has, been upgrading an ERP system. They've realized that when they've finished the upgrade, that their existing data platform isn't going to work correctly or won't ingest data in the right way. So you end up doing a sort of a project as a knee-jerk reaction to another program of work, which obviously puts pressure on it and has a potential impact on the business. So when you're putting in new ERP systems or new line of business applications or doing something that might impact your data platforms, changing cloud provider or doing a transformation program, you should be thinking about all of the aspects of your infrastructure and in this case, your data platform impact. I think aligning technology and tooling is really important. We talk a lot about a Microsoft ecosystem, and when you think about something like Power BI as a visualization tool, if you've got E5 licensing, you're in a Microsoft ecosystem, you've got SharePoint 365 Power Platform tooling being used around the business, and Power BI integrates directly with all of those tools. So choosing a different product to Power BI would have to have quite a compelling use case to give you a reason as to why you wouldn't choose to use that tool, especially if you're on certain tiers of licensing where you've got Power BI bundled for free as part of it. So choosing technology that works well together, that maybe it's compromised in some areas, and when you put it together as a whole, perhaps it offers you a lot of additional benefits over and above that killer feature that you're looking at in a third-party tool. Performance and scale is always a consideration, and looking at your data volumes and considering, from a data platform perspective, am I carrying data I don't need? Are there strategies you can use for archiving data, cold storage, or having data accessible but maybe not on the most performant tier, so you can manage costs around the platform? And understand your performance benchmarks. We have clients that have real-time requirements. They're processing rating engines in real time and want to see price movements. And we've got other organizations where data doesn't change that regularly in their business, so an overnight refresh is fine for them. So set benchmarks that meet the objectives of your business and then build your platform back against those. Obviously, understanding costs and the top cost of ownership of a platform is critically important, and a lot of the softer benefits often get overlooked when you're replacing manual workload and automating processes and taking away activity that consumes people's time in their day jobs. There are often massive benefits to be had from putting in an appropriate data platform that supports and augments some of that workload. And Measuring that can be challenging, so certainly something to consider when you're putting together that proposal for putting a data platform in place. And training and platform ownership is critical. You'll find that transparency and encouraging ownership of your platform is key to how we go about delivering solutions. And we find the most successful data platforms and data implementations are those where the customer's been able to take ownership of that platform, manage the BAU activity, and drive that solution forward. As a partner, we'd always be there to support and help as is required with different programs of work that you might have. But being able to own your own platform is important, and getting the skills and training into your employees that can do that is also part of that. And it's obvious, but try and add value. If you're doing a lift and shift, there could be a few quick wins that you can add into that lift and shift process that add some additional value, perhaps a feature or report, some analytics that the business doesn't have today. It will help drive ownership and adoption of your platform, and obviously it starts to generate interest in terms of the potential of what you can do with that platform moving forward. And we talk about the potential for a data platform. I think when we talk more widely about strategy and we talk about solutions overview, your first pillar here, unified data platform, is where you would start. Fabric, Synapse, who cares? You've got a data platform that delivers what you need. But when you get that established, it will start to drive capability around AI. AI is data hungry. It will need to consume data from somewhere, and you often find that a lot of these workloads fall off the back of an established data platform. Data and system integration is a key part of most enterprises these days, and you often find that the data platform becomes a key part of that ecosystem as well, driving and supporting those integration needs. And in the Microsoft land, you talk about business process automation. We've got Copilot and Power Platform, M365. That all integrates tightly with the data solutions that we put in. So you start to see operational benefit for the wider business as part of that as well. I won't dwell on this too much, but our usual call to action slide is here. So if you want to do some discovery and run workshops, shape a data strategy, look at a design blueprint, put together a statement of work, we can explore that with you. There are all sorts of opportunities for funding proof of concepts and MVPs, some supported by us and some supported by Microsoft. Give you a route into exploring technology in a cost-effective way. All of the assessments that we run, whether it's cloud adoption for frameworks, whether it's looking at data and AI capability, there's a whole load of programs we can support there. And look, getting your hands on technology is really important. Hackathons, in-a-day activities, you'll find all sorts of bits and pieces that we'll publish through our website where we're running events and encouraging people to come and play with and get their hands on technology. And we're doing more and more of this as we go through this year, just to get people some exposure to tech, have a play with it and just understand what it can do for you. So look, there's a few contact details on here that we'll share. You can reach out for a bit more information on some of these programs to explore them if you need to.